Good evening. It's been a scorchingly hot day here in Hove. I'm Father Alexander, parish priest of St. Peter's in Hove. And that's why I'm red in the face and why I'm wearing a t shirt. I think it's probably the hottest day of the year so far. Feast of St. Benedict, 11th of July. And today I want to talk about the 98th Psalm, Psalm 98, bracket 99, in what I think is our 182nd step in our walking tour through the Bible. Now, this psalm is also used, it's one of the psalms that you can use for starting off the office. In other words, it's an alternative invitatory psalm. But it's a psalm that has in it something rather important. All the psalms do, I suppose. This one particularly important, something we've lost sight of. The Lord is king, the peoples tremble. He is throned on the cherubim, the earth quakes. The Lord is great in Zion. So Zion is where the Lord lives, and that's where we're going. It's an invitatory psalm. It's a psalm of procession of entry into the temple. He is supreme over all the peoples. Let them praise his name, so terrible and great. He is holy, full of power. You are a king who loves what is right. You've established equity, justice, and right. You've established them in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God. Bow down before Zion, his footstool. He, the Lord, is holy. Among his priests were Aaron and Moses. Among those who invoked his name was Samuel. They invoked the Lord, and he answered. To them he spoke in a pillar of cloud. They did his will. They kept the law which he, the Lord, had given. O Lord our God, you answered them. For them you are a God who forgives, yet you punished all their offences. Exalt the Lord our God. Bow down before his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. What on earth does that mean? The Lord our God is holy. What is the meaning of holiness? Well, when I was a little boy, I knew the answer to this. I wouldn't have been able to put it into words, but I knew instinctively what was holy. Churches were holy places. There were also holy pictures, which I collected, and there were holy people who I knew. I knew what was holy. And again, I knew what was not holy. I knew what was sinful, but I also knew what was not holy in the sense of what was profane, that which is to say, which is not holy. It doesn't mean necessarily wrong, it's just not holy. There's a difference between the holy and the profane, the sacred and the profane. What is holy, what makes a place holy, is very simple. The answer is here in this psalm. The presence of God makes a place holy. God is in his temple, therefore the temple is holy. God is in his people, in individual people, therefore those people become holy. Certain things are consecrated, set aside for the use of God, therefore they are holy. Certain things make us think of God, holy pictures, therefore they are holy. Holiness is the quality of God. Now, okay, I don't think I've answered the question though, have I? What is the quality of God? The peoples tremble. He is throned on the cherubim. The earth quakes. The Lord is great in Zion. He is supreme over all the peoples. So the power of God is his holiness. The power of God is quite frightening. The earth trembles before him. Let them praise his name. So terrible and great. He is holy, full of power. God has power over the whole earth, therefore this makes him holy. Yes, I can see that, but that is not quite what a Christian feels when they feel the holiness of God. If you go back to what Virgil said, and Virgil was a very religious man, in my humble opinion, Virgil talks about the noumen, the sense of God, the Godhead, and the terror that comes on people when they encounter the noumen, when they encounter the presence of God. In other words, holiness, the glory of God, is terror. It is frightening. It is something that is outside the normal run of things, something that leaves you breathless in shock. And that seems to be more or less the same here. The earth quakes, the Lord is great in Zion. Bow down before his Zion, his footstool, he, the Lord, is holy. And indeed, when God appears on Mount Sinai to Moses, the earth quakes, fire and so on and so forth. There's smoke and so on. There's sort of a volcanic eruption. Again, when the prophet Elijah goes into the desert To meet God, there is earthquake, wind, and fire. So God is terrible in his power. And here we have his praise his name so terrible and great. Now, quam terribilis est locus iste, as Jacob said at Bethel. How awesome is this place? Terrible just means awesome. And terrible means that which inspires terror, that which frightens us half to death. But I don't think this really gives us the Christian sense of what to encounter the holiness of God is like. When we come into God's presence, we don't actually feel fear. We don't actually tremble. We don't feel our knees go weak, as, let's say, the people who encounter the Godhead do in the poetry of Virgil. And the psalmist knows this because he goes on to say, among his priests were Aaron and Moses. Among those who invoked his name was Samuel. They invoked the Lord, and he answered. Now, in fact, Moses was not a priest, but the point of the matter is Aaron, Moses, and Samuel were the interlocutors of God. They spoke to God, he answered. In other words, they communicated with God, God communicated with them. Now, what you have at the beginning of the psalm is the idea that God is transcendent, God is beyond us, God leaves us breathless with fear and terror. But in the second part of the psalm, what you have is God is the one who speaks to human beings, which is rather different. So we've got his transcendent vision of God and an immanent vision of God. And we're told in the Bible, after all, that God spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend face to face. They have intimate conversations. To them he spoke in the pillar of cloud. They did his will, they kept the law, which he, the Lord, had given. O Lord our God, you answered them. For them you were a God who forgives. Yet you punished all their offences. So, okay, God is great, he punishes our offences. But he is also kind, loving, and forgiving, and accessible. Exalt the Lord our God, bow down before his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. So what we have in this psalm is the transcendence of God and the immanence of God. And truth of the matter is, and this is why this psalm is important, we need both. We need to be in awe of God in his presence, and we need to be at ease in God's presence. We need to speak to God familiarly as you would speak to your friend. And you also need to remember that God is the one who reigns over the whole earth. He is terrible and he is great. But those two things we need to keep in mind. But the most important thing we need to keep in mind is that God is holy, and we need to recover our sense of the holy. Now, what that means is, of course, that God is not every day. God is not, I don't want to say not in the marketplace, because he is in the marketplace, but God is to be found on the mountaintop as well as in the marketplace. God is to be found in the church as well as in the marketplace. God is to be found in the words of the liturgy as well as in the words we speak to each other. In other words, we need to rediscover the idea of God as somewhat different to our everyday encounters. The encounter with God is a special encounter. When I was a very small boy, I used to love going to church, and I suppose I still do love going to church, though it might have changed somewhat. We need to reignite in ourselves and in others the love of the church, the love of the building rather than the assembly, the love of the building. It's terribly important. There was, I think I've mentioned this before, some sort of survey about what brought you to God. Was it somebody evangelizing you? And the answer was no, it wasn't. Generally, it was rather a visit to a church. What spoke to people was the building. Buildings speak. Buildings have atmosphere. Buildings have something about them, makes people want to come back. So we need to promote the idea of the sacred and the holy in contradistinction to the profane. And we're not saying by promoting the holy and the distinct that we're against the profane. I go into Sainsbury's an awful lot, and that is a profane place in that it's not a church. but it's not necessarily a bad place. I meet lots of people there and I buy delicious food. So we need the profane in our life. The profane is not the sinful, but we also need the sacred. We need to get back to this idea of the sacred. Hope that helps. All the very best.